Why do we feel this desperate urge to chase after someone who just walked away from us? You've just been dumped, and every fiber of your being is screaming at you to fix this, to explain yourself, to convince them they made a mistake. But here's what I discovered about begging after a breakup that completely changed my perspective on relationships forever. There are 3 critical mistakes people make when they get dumped, and the third one is so damaging it can destroy your chances with anyone else for years to come. But first, let me tell you about the trap your brain is setting for you right now. Think about it. When someone breaks up with you, your first instinct isn't to respect their decision. It's to panic. Your mind races with all the things you could have done differently, all the words you should have said, all the ways you could still make this work. You start crafting long text messages, planning surprise visits, rehearsing speeches about how much they mean to you. Here's the problem though, and this connects to something much darker that most people never realize about their own behavior in relationships. When you beg someone to stay, you're not fighting for love. You're fighting against the terrifying reality that someone chose to leave you. You're battling your own sense of worth, your fear of abandonment, your deep-seated belief that maybe you're not enough. But there's something even more insidious happening here that I need to explain before we get to the real solution. The person who dumped you has become a symbol of your validation, and losing them feels like losing yourself. This is the first critical mistake, and it's connected to a psychological pattern that will sabotage every relationship you ever have if you don't understand it. Society has fed us this narrative that fighting for love is romantic. We've watched countless movies where the protagonist chases after their lost love, makes grand gestures, and wins them back in the end. We've been conditioned to believe that giving up means you didn't care enough, that real love means never letting go. But here's what those movies don't show you, and this is where the second mistake becomes deadly. When you beg after being dumped, you're essentially telling the other person that their feelings, their decision, their autonomy doesn't matter as much as your need to keep them. You're saying that your fear of being alone is more important than their right to choose who they want to be with. Think about how that sounds. Think about how that feels from their perspective. Every text you send explaining why they're wrong, every call where you promise to change, every show of desperation actually pushes them further away. Why? Because desperation is the opposite of the qualities that attracted them to you in the first place. They fell for your confidence, your independence, your ability to add value to their life. When you beg, you're showing them a version of yourself that's needy, dependent, and emotionally unstable. But this leads us to the second critical mistake. And understanding this will save you from repeating a pattern that destroys not just this relationship, but every future relationship too. You're revealing a fundamental misunderstanding about what healthy love actually looks like. Healthy love doesn't require convincing. It doesn't need to be fought for with desperation. It flows naturally between 2 people who choose each other freely without coercion or manipulation. The person who truly loves you won't need to be convinced to stay. They won't need speeches about your worth or promises about how you'll change. They'll see your value clearly, and they'll choose to be with you because being with you enhances their life, not because you've worn them down with persistence. But understanding this alone isn't enough to break the cycle, because there's still that third mistake I mentioned. Here's what happens when you don't beg, and this is crucial for what I'm about to reveal. When you receive that breakup conversation and you respond with dignity, something powerful occurs. You maintain your self-respect. You show that while you're hurt, you're not broken. You demonstrate that you understand love requires 2 willing participants, and you're not interested in forcing someone to love you. This doesn't mean you don't feel the pain. The hurt is real and valid. You're allowed to grieve the relationship, to feel disappointed, to wish things had turned out differently. But there's a crucial difference between processing your emotions privately and using those emotions to manipulate someone else's decision. And this difference is what leads to the third and most damaging mistake. When you don't beg, you also create space for something unexpected to happen. Sometimes, when people see that you respect their decision enough to let them go, they start to question whether they made the right choice. But here's the critical part, and this connects directly to that third mistake I promised to reveal. Even if they do come back, they're coming back to someone who maintained their dignity, not someone who begged them to reconsider. More importantly, when you don't beg, you preserve your ability to heal and move forward. Every time you reach out in desperation, you're reopening the wound. You're keeping yourself stuck in a cycle of hope and disappointment that prevents you from processing the loss and growing from it. But without understanding the third mistake, even this knowledge won't save you from repeating the same patterns. The hardest part about not begging is facing the silence. When you don't reach out, when you don't try to fix things, You have to sit with the reality that this person chose to leave. You have to confront your own thoughts about what this means about you, about your worth, about your future. But this discomfort is where growth happens, and it's directly connected to the third critical mistake that I'm about to reveal. Now here's the third mistake, and this is the one that will either make or break every relationship you have for the rest of your life. The third mistake is believing that your worth is determined by whether someone stays or leaves. When you make this mistake, it doesn't matter if you beg or don't beg, because you're still operating from a place of seeking external validation for your value as a person. In that silence after someone leaves, you start to remember who you were before this relationship. You start to reconnect with your own interests, your own goals, your own sense of purpose. You begin to understand that your worth isn't determined by one person's decision to stay or leave. You're valuable regardless of whether this particular person recognizes it. But here's the connection between all three mistakes that changes everything. When you avoid begging, process the first mistake of seeking validation through others, overcome the second mistake of misunderstanding healthy love, and finally conquer the third mistake of tying your worth to someone else's decision, you become the kind of person who attracts genuine love naturally. You focus on yourself. You invest in your own growth, your own interests, your own healing. You become the kind of person who attracts healthy love naturally, not through desperation or manipulation. Most importantly, you trust the process. You trust that someone who leaves wasn't meant to stay, and that the right person won't need to be convinced of your worth. When you don't beg after being dumped, you're making a statement about what kind of love you're willing to accept. You're saying that you deserve someone who chooses you enthusiastically, not someone who stays out of guilt or pressure. The person who's right for you won't walk away easily, and if they do leave, they weren't your person to begin with. Let them go with grace, knowing that your dignity intact is worth more than any relationship you have to beg for.